Hey guys, what's going on? It's Jordan. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you for stopping by. Alright, so today we are talking about this guy right here, this camera that I have owned for a little bit over a year now. This is the Canon EOS RP, so this is becoming, I guess at this point, is a pretty old system in comparison to some of the newer stuff that has been released, like the R5, the R6, the R3, the R7, and R10. Now, this right here, along with the EOS R and the RA, were some of Canon's first full-frame mirrorless cameras, and this is probably one of my favorite options for the best full-frame budget mirrorless camera. Unfortunately, I do offer this to a lot of people. I say if you're looking for a good full-frame starter camera for under $1,000, the EOS RP is really good. If you're not a Canon fan, I'm sorry, but most Nikon and Sony, Fuji, Panasonic, like they don't have a full frame camera that's under $1,000 where you can still get a lens like the 50mm and still be right around $1,000. So just take that into consideration. Anyways, this came out in 2019. So this was all shot on the Canon EOS RP with the RF 50mm f1.8. So let's go ahead and dive into this right now. Today we are talking about the low light capabilities on this camera, so let's go ahead and get started. So for starters, the ISO range on this camera for photography goes to ISO 50. So there is a secret setting you can set to ISO 50 all the way up to ISO 102,400. So 102,400 for photography. And for video, if you're shooting it in 1080p, which gives you the full frame sensor, it uses ISO 100 all the way up to ISO 25,600. Now, if you want to shoot in 4K, which is cropped, you're going to get ISO 100 up to ISO 12,800. Now, I will admit, for video, I did skip the in-between ISOs from 100 to 800 because the lower ISO levels show little to no noise. So you really only start to notice some of that noise around the ISO of 800 if you're really pixel peeping. So just take that into consideration. So like this camera has ISO 100, 125, I think it is. 150 or something like that, and then it goes up to 200, and then like 250, 320 to 400, 500, 640 to 800. So just take that into consideration. There really is little to no noise in those ranges, so I just kind of skipped over that. I mean, I just went from 100, 200, 400, 600, and then to 800. So honestly, I mean, if it really bugs you all that much, I am sorry, but we're just testing out the low light capabilities on this camera, and I figured since the noise was so clean in those little like low range areas, I just figured we'd skip them anyways. So starting off, we're going to go into photography low light images starting at 50 ISO. There's basically absolutely no noise, and then by 400 ISO, you really need to zoom in to notice any of the sensor noise that starts to form. So at ISO 400, you basically have to pixel peep to find anything wrong with that image. Now, bumping it up to ISO 1000, some noise is present, but there is still a small amount that you have to really zoom in significantly to see any. At ISO 1600, you do start to notice some of the noise in the shadows. At ISO 4000, the noise becomes more noticeable without zooming or cropping the image. At ISO 6400, you notice the noise in all of the images throughout the image, so basically in the highlights, the shadows, the midtones, basically all throughout the image at 6400, you kind of really start to notice it. And then by ISO 10,000, the noise becomes heavy enough that you'd have to add noise reduction to the image. Now, there is noise reduction in camera. I actually normally keep that off anyways because I like the look of some of the noise. I'm not really one of those people that wants noise in all of their image, but if it's a little noisy, I don't necessarily mind it as much. There's no really need for the camera to do any of the auto noise reduction for you. Just do it in post because you're going to get a better end result. Just take that as it is. Anyways, back to the information. At ISO 12,800, the noise has increased again. ISO 16,000, the same thing, the noise has increased, and you notice it all throughout the image. At ISO 25,600, the noise in the image has become so prevalent that no amount of noise reduction would really be worth the effort unless you wanted your images to look overly processed. So just take that into consideration. If you plan on shooting past like 10,000, you're really going to have to use a lot of noise reduction. And if you have to use a lot of noise reduction, your images are probably going to look like shit. At ISO 40,000, the images is extremely noisy and not really worth using. And by ISO 100 to 4000, so 102,400, the image is so bad that it is best not to even attempt using this for anything like either personal or professional. So just take that into consideration. I really don't think that using ISO 102,400 is even worth it. I'm not really sure why Canon offers you that. You can unlock this in the secret menu, so just take that into consideration. This does not come on the camera. You basically have to go in and set it to like a high ISO, like 1 and 2. So just take that into consideration. But it does go up to 102,400, and it really is not worth using. So I'm not even really sure why Canon offers that at all. In just my personal opinion, for the photography aspect, I think that reasonably you could easily use up to ISO 10,000 for most images if you needed to. The noise isn't too terrible by that point, and adding some noise reduction to the images wouldn't have any real terrible adverse effects unless you're using too much and making the images look overly processed. So like I said, I mean, ISO 10,000 for photography, I think you could easily get away with that. But pretty much anything under that, I think you should be all right with. Normally, you're really not pushing ISO 10,000 unless you're shooting in like a really dark scene where there's basically little to no noise, or there's basically little to no light. So just take that into consideration. I mean, if you're in a studio, if you're outside, even like at nighttime, you know, you could easily shoot at like 6,400 and still get a pretty decent image. 10,000, I think by that point, if you're just at 10,000, that's probably the limit. So just take that into consideration. Those are just my opinions. Anyways, let's go on to video low light samples. Now, just so you know, this camera, like I said, came out in 2019. There is no dual native ISO, so just take that into consideration. Canon is not necessarily known for having cameras with dual native ISOs. Unfortunately, like I know that Panasonic and some Sony cameras, probably even some Nikon, because they use Sony sensors. So just take that into consideration. Anyways, let's go ahead and jump into 1080p video right now. Starting off at ISO 100, there is no visible noise. By ISO 400, there is some slight noise in the shadows, but unnoticed unless cropping the image in significantly. By ISO 1250, you notice the noise in the shadows more, and at 2000 ISO, you start to really notice the noise throughout the image. At ISO 5000, the noise is pretty noticeable, especially for video, and by ISO 8000, the noise is so noticeable that this would have to be an absolute limit for video shooters considering using it. While there are plugins and software to reduce noise in video, I don't think that looks or works good enough compared to like the photography noise reduction software. So just take that into consideration. I can remove noise in DaVinci Resolve. I'm sure probably Final Cut and Premiere Pro also have some sort of like noise reduction, but honestly, in my opinion, I think that for video, you really kind of want to stay away from that unless you absolutely need to. So by ISO 10,000, the image only gets worse from here, and by ISO 16,000, in my opinion, it's pretty unusable for anything outside of shooting grainy Bigfoot footage in the woods. Same thing goes with ISO 20,000, and at the end of the spectrum, 25,600 is just a mess. So if you're shooting any content out in the woods looking for Bigfoot or UFOs, maybe you want to shoot at 20,000 just to kind of give it that kind of like old school vintage feel. But yeah, so if you're trying to shoot videos of UFOs or Sasquatch, that's probably all those high ISOs are really good for. Now moving on to 4K video samples. Something to note on the 4K footage is Canon up until recently has always cropped in their 4K footage, so this is close to a 1.6 times crop. I'm pretty sure that the EOS RP, when you do shoot in 4K, is a true 1.6 times crop. I think in the EOS R, that's like a 1.7 times crop or something like that. There is a speed booster that you can buy for this from Metabones. It's like an EF to like EOS R. So if you wanted to shoot in 4K but have more of that crop reduced, you can buy like an EF. There is no like R to R, so you would have to use like a Canon EF 50mm, like f1.4 or f1.8, something like that, or you know, whatever you choose, Tamron, Sigma. Anyways, so starting off at ISO 100, this does start off strong like most of the rest of the testing that we have done so far. By 800 ISO, there is minimal noise in the shadows of the image. And then by 1000, you start to notice the noise creep into the image. And I think this is mostly due because the image is cropped in already from using the 4K, although a little bit sharper. At ISO 2000, again, it becomes more noticeable. At ISO 3200, the noise is so noticeable throughout all of the image. At ISO 3200, the noise is noticeable throughout all of the image. At ISO 6400, I think that this would be an absolute limit for 4K video, my opinion, as there is a significant amount of noise in the image. ISOs 8000, 10,000, and 12,800 are, again, pretty unusable for anything other than shooting grainy Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or UFO footage. And that is the end of the low light footage information that I have for you guys. So I shot it on this, like I said, and this is basically the setup I used. I used the Canon RF 50mm f1.8. So just take that into consideration. This was all shot on this. Now, like I said, I mean, I did use this setup right here. So the EOS RP with the RF50 f1.8. And I think even shooting at just an f1.8, which I think most people that are shooting anything for video are going to want lenses that are super wide open like this. So just take that into consideration. If you're shooting video and you're in some really low light situation, you're using a 50mm f1.8, those are the results that you're going to get with this. Now, I will note that my camera is a little bit older. It is actually used. I purchased it from Canon. I couldn't tell you what the shutter count on this was, but I think that this should kind of bleed over to any other EOS RPs that are out there. I don't think that my sensor is that bad where it's creating more noise than maybe a newer body, but I could be wrong. So just take that into consideration without actually having a brand new EOS RP to test. There really is no telling, but those are just the samples and the information that I got shooting with this setup right here. So take that into consideration, take that with a grain of salt. Hopefully this information is helpful. You guys found it helpful, useful, and informational. If you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I will answer them to the best of my ability. If you guys like this video, go ahead, give it a thumbs up, give it a like. If you didn't like this video, also give it a thumbs up. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit all the buttons. I'm Jordan, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.